function app, note the as placeholder, which is used for a source code that didn't change, and it isn't relevant for this code snippet. So the is a source code that was not changed or not relevant. Export default app, and then export default app for others to use our app. Each item in the list has title, an URL, an author, an identifier, object ID, points which indicate the popularity of an item, and a count of comments, num_comments. So each item here, as you can see, has a title, a URL, author, num_comment, points, and objects ID. With the object ID points or indicates the popularity of an item, and a count of comments, num_comments. The property names are chosen this way because they resemble real-world data that we are going to use later. They don't fit the desired naming conventions for JavaScript though, because one of them uses an underscore, for example. So remember the JavaScript idiom for their names, so it doesn't follow. So some of our React ways are actually do not follow JavaScript. Next, we'll render the list inlined in JSX with arrays built-in map method. Hence, we won't map from one JavaScript data type to another, but instead return JSX that render each item of the list. So again, next we'll render the list inlined in JSX with arrays built in map method. Hence, we won't map from one JavaScript data type to another, but instead return JSX that render each item of the list. So as you can see, we have list.map here to render the JSX. So we don't map it though with the JavaScript function, but rather a JSX syntax. So that's how we use map in the front end. Finally, React displays each item now, but there's one important piece missing. If you check your browser's developer tools, you should see a warning showing up in the console tab, which says that every React element in a list should have a key assignment to it. The key is an HTML attribute and should be stable identifier. Fortunately, our items come with such a stable identifier because they have an ID here, object ID. So after this, it will now display this or each item, because again this is a front end mapping. But if we check it, it will show that there's no key assigned to it. The key is an HTML attribute and should be a stable identifier. So a key should be an HTML attribute and should be stable. Fortunately, our items come with such a stable identifier because we have an ID, which is the object ID. So we just use that key equals to item.object ID, then item.title closing li. The key attribute is used for one specific reason. Whenever React has to re-render a list, it checks whether an item has changed. When using keys, React can efficiently exchange the changed items. When not using keys, React may update the list inefficiently. Take the following example where a new item gets appended at the start of the list. The key is not difficult to find because usually when having data in the shape of an array, we can use each item's table identifier like ID property. So without keys, here we have React li update it li JavaScript, and then li Redux update React, and then we insert. Here we insert first li JavaScript, then keep, then keep. So instead of updating each time, we kind of like have the advantage of the diffing algorithm because it just return the same thing because it's actually querying the same thing as well. However, sometimes you do not have an ID, so you need to come up with another identifier, i.e. title if it does not change and if it's unique in the array. As a last resort, you can use the index of the item in the list too. So if you do not have that object ID we have, sometimes you need to come up on your own. You need to identify what's not changing or the invariant. So as a last resort, you can use the index of the item in the list too. So here function item index. So we use an index as an ID. Return li key equals to index. Only use an index as a last resort. And by the way, that's how you do comments in JSX /*. Then item.title, then closing li. So this is how we map using an ID of index. Usually using an index should be avoided though because it comes with the same rendering performance issues from above. In addition, it can cause actual bugs in the UI whenever the order of items updates, reordering, appending, or removing items. So usually you should avoid index as a unique identifier because it may get the same issue as above. So it could especially cause the UI bugs if there is a reordering, appending, or removing of items. However, as last resort, if the list does not change its order in any way, using the index is fine. So far, we're only displaying the title of each item. Go ahead and render the item's URL, author, num_comments, and points as well. In the special case of URL as an HTML anchor, HTML element, read a tag that surrounds the title. So far, we're mapping to the title of each item, but what if we want to render the URL, author, and num_comments and other attributes as well, or other member of the object as well? In the special case of the URL, use an HTML anchor such as this href item.url that surrounds the title. Because it's a URL, so it needs to be kind of highlighted. The arrays map method is inlined concisely in your JSX for rendering a list. Within the map method, we have access to each object and its properties. The URL property of each item is used as href attribute for the anchor HTML element. So the URL is used with the addition of href for the anchor HTML element. Not only can JavaScript in JSX be used to display elements, but also to assign HTML attributes dynamically. And we only scratches the surface of how powerful it is to mix JavaScript and HTML. So not only a JavaScript can be used as a UI or to display elements, but also assign HTML attributes dynamically. So those combination is actually powerful, but it's just the start of how to, it's just the start of explaining how the React actually can be used powerfully with those combination. Question: how to render a list of items in JSX? Answer: use map method to iterate over the array and return JSX elements for each item. Questions: what if you return null instead of the JSX? Answer: returning null in JSX is allowed. It's always used if you want to render nothing. So null is actually always used, or a common or industry term for returning nothing. What does the term JSX expressions refer to? JSX expressions are JavaScript expressions embedded within curly braces in JSX, allowing dynamic content. So JSX expressions are actually a JavaScript expression embedded within its curly bracket, kind of like a body of a function, but instead of returning an actual logic, it's returning a UI or dynamic content. Can you embed HTML directly within JSX? Yes, you can embed HTML directly within JSX, but it's generally discouraged due to security risk. Use dangerously set inner HTML cautiously. So you can embed HTML in JSX, but it's not actually safe. So that's one of the problem React solved. With React, you can actually combine the HTML and JavaScript already, right? You don't need this dangerously set inner HTML. How do you comment in JSX? Use curly braces for JavaScript comments like /* your comment here, */ React component instantiation. Technically, JavaScript classes and React components are not related, which is important to note, but still a fitting analogy for you to understand the concept of a component by using something you may have used in the past. A class is most often used in object-oriented programming languages. JavaScript as a multi-paradigm programming language allows a functional programming and object-oriented programming to coexist side by side. To recap, JavaScript classes for object-oriented programming, consider the following person class. So, class person, inside semicolon is a constructor, parameter first name, comma last name. Inside parent semicolon is this that first name equal first name semicolon, the next name this that last name equal last name semicolon, closing semicolon bracket. Then get name method, inside is a semicolon, inside of semicolon bracket return this that first name plus quote plus this that last name semicolon, closing semicolon bracket, closing semicolon bracket.